Hello, my name is Gabby, and I'm the type of person who's happiest when they're being creative and trying new things. On this channel, I try different creative projects and share my journey with you. Something I've made a part of my life the last few years is making a season-based painting at the change of the season. I've mostly been working in watercolor and gouache, and I usually follow tutorials here on YouTube to help me hone my skills. The winter solstice was over a month ago, but I hadn't started my channel then. So today I'm going to be doing a winter landscape painting using gouache paints. This painting will be based on a photo my husband took recently on a walk in a local park. Let's get started. For this painting, I'm using Arch's cold-pressed watercolor paper. I started out by taking a sheet off the watercolor block, cutting it in half, and taping it down on the table. Then I started sketching the general shapes I could see in the photo. I had to adjust this a couple of times because I didn't quite get the proportions right the first time, but I wasn't too worried about accuracy. To start out with, I used zinc white, primary blue, ultramarine blue, and primary yellow. I also used a size 14 flat brush. I thought I'd start out with the yellow color of the sun in the sky as the base since it shows up behind some of those clouds. I also started out with a lighter wash, which is a watery consistency of paint, to avoid the layering problems you can get with gouache. You may notice the sheet of paper to the left with the yellow square. After doing more research on gouache since my last video, I learned that making swatches can help with a lot of things, including saving paint and being able to match the color when you run out of a mix and have to make more. This was really helpful for this painting, and I don't think I'll ever go back to painting without an extra piece of paper for swatches. Next, I started on the mountains in the background. I don't have a lot of experience painting snow, so this was a color journey for sure over the course of this painting. I didn't nail it, but I did learn a lot through this. Also, in an effort to waste less paint, I tried to mix only a little bit of color at a time. This was really helpful for not wasting paint, but it meant I spent a lot of time mixing colors. But don't worry, I cut most of that out of the video for you. But it's just something to keep in mind. I skipped over to the right side of the painting next to start on the sky. I did this because I knew I wanted a similar color to the mountains on this side of the painting, so I was using the same paint for both the mountains and the sky. You'll see that as I paint, I kind of hop around to different parts. Sometimes this is helpful to keep my interest in the painting, but sometimes I end up doing things outside of the ideal order and having to paint over it. I decided to do the second mountain with a cooler blue. This was in an attempt to add some dimension and interest to my painting, because in the past I've made paintings that feel kind of flat and lack visual interest, so I was trying something different. I don't know if it looked great in the end, but I tried something new, and that's what matters, right? Anyways, I started too dark, so I mixed in some white into this cool blue and went over it again. I then used this cool toned blue on the snow in the foreground, but don't get too attached to the way it looks now. I think I go over the ground with at least 3 different colors over the course of the video. I call this move my schwing. I do it when I'm nervous about continuing or don't really know what to work on next. She's a recurring character in this video. Here I've added color to the riverbank. You can see in the photo that the riverbank has a little drop off. I thought adding the cool toned blue for the snow on the bank would help. This was one part of the painting that I wasn't really exactly sure how to capture, and I think it shows in the final product. I added that cool toned color to the snow in the distance as well. Apologies for the focus issues. I lean into my work when I get focused and the camera focuses on my head instead of the painting. I'm still working on my filming setup, so hopefully I'll find something that works, but for now, enjoy the fuzzy top of my head. The consistency of the gouache I used for the opposite bank of the river is a perfect consistency. I don't think I got that consistency in any other part of the painting, but I painted this bank with a more neutral toned blue, and again, I'm just trying to change it up in that way. I did make the mistake of adding the ice color over the river before painting the water. That gets covered up later. I used the warm blue for the most distant hill in the background as well. For the wood of the shelter, I used ivory black, yellow ochre, permanent green metal, and spectrum red. I mixed these colors up to get a warm brown, and I used a size maybe 2 round brush. I don't know the size because the size rubbed off of the paintbrush. Next, I used a filbert brush to make the background of the bushes and shrubs in the distance with a cool toned gray. For the river, I used ivory black, permanent green metal, primary blue, zinc white, and spectrum red, and I mixed those colors together to get a tealish blue. I also used a size 20 flat brush for this part. This is another part of the painting that I changed a few times. I really liked the gradient that I created here to begin with the darker teal on the left and the lighter blue teal on the right. But it ended up being too dark, and I wasn't going to be able to add the details on top of this in the way that I wanted to. So it does shift later. Then I moved back to painting the sky. I used the side of that round brush to try and imitate the cloud shapes, and I used different shades of blue-gray to kind of make the different clouds in the sky. I wasn't copying the picture exactly, I just wanted to kind of get the general idea. I don't think this was a bad technique, but I do think that I could execute it better in the future. Next, I started adding the darker shades to the mountains to add some dimension to them. These shadows that I'm painting here do shift over the course of the painting as well. I had a really hard time getting the right color and trying to get the right shapes in there to make it look at least a little bit realistic. So yeah, you'll see those shift over the course of the video. The shadows I'm adding here on this mountain were very vibrant, almost a teal color, and pretty dark, which I didn't like, so I go and change that later on as well. And then I added some footprints and shadows in the snow, but those were a bit too light. You can see the common theme here of I just go in hoping for the best, and then if it doesn't look quite correct, then I cover it up. Like I said, that's a common theme of this painting. Here I'm adding more highlights to the snow. Just trying to, again, add more dimension. Going into day 2 now, I started adding more of the highlights here, and then over on the left side I just painted over that foreground with a warmer blue. I just felt like it matched more what I wanted. Here I lightened up the second mountain, that cooler toned mountain. I didn't quite like how dark it was, so I wanted to go in and make it a little bit lighter so I could add some shadows in. And I used that same blue to add some clouds over on the right. Next, I started trying making ripples in the river, but I realized again that the base was too dark, so I ended up going over the entire thing in a lighter color. I also switched the gradient to be darker on the right side to be more accurate to the photo, since that ice is kind of creating shadows in the river on the right side of the river. After changing up that gradient, I went in and added some darker areas in the shadowy parts of the river and along the edge as well, under the icy parts. Sometimes when I'm watching YouTube tutorials or art process videos on YouTube, you see the painting kind of not make sense at first and then really start to come together as the artist starts adding more detail. That is not the case in this painting. This painting doesn't really make sense to me in the end. I was hoping it would come together as I went, but I don't quite have the skill for that yet, so I don't want to set you up to expect this grand painting in the end. This is really just someone who is learning how to paint and who is sharing that process with you. So maybe you're doing the same thing, then we can learn together. Anyways, then I slowly started adding bits of ice by layering lighter and lighter gray-blue values on top of each other to create that puzzle piece look of the ice on the right side of the river. Because that ice hasn't fully formed over the river, it's still forming, so it has those thinner pieces of ice on the outside, which create those fading colors as the ice moves outwards. I realized I made those ice pieces a bit small and that area looked a bit empty, so I just started puzzling in other smaller pieces of ice between the larger ones to kind of fill out that area. I was kind of winging this. It might not look as realistic as I would like, but I do like the more full look. I keep on mentioning realistic, but really my goal with my paintings is to be more loose. I mentioned this in my last video, but the way that I was taught art was to try and be as realistic as possible. Obviously, I'm not good at that. So I'm trying to move more towards a looser style of painting and trying to embrace the non-realistic forms of painting. I'm still trying to find my own art style. I might make a video about that in the future, figuring out how to find my art style. But I wanted to mention, I do keep on saying more realistic, but I am trying to keep more loose. The goal of this painting is not to be realistic. I started out adding the highlights to the river. You can see that the river kind of has this like greenish tint to it from the sun coming in at that angle. The blue color of the water, the reflections of the snow, and then that yellow color of the sun kind of makes that greenish tint. So I added that green into the river. I'm not sure that it translated very well the way that I did it. If I were to do it again, I probably would have started out with the river itself being a much lighter base and then painting the darker ripples on top. I did that, but the colors didn't quite match, so I'm not sure if it translated well. After this, I moved on to shading because I was afraid to actually start the ripples of the river. But once I finished the shading and I gathered my nerve, I went back in and added the ripples. I definitely didn't do these as loosely as I would have liked. They kind of look stiff and unrealistic to me. I also think I went a little too hard on the detail. I went in and tried to add a lot of the tiny ripples, and I think next time I would like to try adding those bigger ripples first and then adding more ripples and details as I see fit. I went in later with a lighter color to add lighter colored ripples to the water to add more dimension. And then I went in and added some of those greenish highlights again to the water. Between day 1 and day 2, I looked up some more on painting snow because I felt like I really wasn't getting it. And I did learn that painting shadows on snow on cloudy days, you should make it a more purpley tint. So I tried to make the proper color mixture with that information to add snow to the newly painted foreground. I do like the way that this ended up. I do think that these shadows are a little bit more realistic than the ones on the mountains that I made. Speaking of the mountains, I did go back in with the shadows on the second mountain, and that mix ended up being a little too dark, so I just went in and added some white to that color and went over it again to lighten them up. Next, I went in and worked on the grass, mixing permanent yellow deep, permanent green middle, and yellow ochre with some white to get the right color. I went in and added little patches here and there of grass. I probably should have gone in with a darker base color to begin with, like I did for the bushes and shrubs in the background, but hindsight is 20/20, right? I went in with a bit of a darker color to add, let's say it together, dimension. I also stippled some of that darker color in areas where the grass texture wasn't as clear, just to give the idea of plants being in that area, but not needing to add the detail in. Next, I started working on the trees and shrubs. My trees overall ended up a bit clunky and thick. I think I need a smaller brush that I can control better to make finer lines. I struggle with the hand control needed in order to make those finer lines with this big of a brush, even though this is a pretty small brush. I started on day 3 with adding lighter highlights to the snow. I put them on the mountains and in the field on the foreground, and I added the highlight on the top of the little snow mounds right above the shadows because that's where the light touches them. Swing, 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 swing. Then I went in with brown and added the spots of bare ground along the riverbank, the parts that don't have snow on them. I also went in and added trees in the background in this color. I just thought it was a good color for the trees, so I took advantage of the fact that it was already on my brush. After that, then I added the grass poking out of those gaps in the snow. I did this in a few different colors. And again, taking advantage of this color being on my brush already, I added some grass to the field as well. Here I'm just adding some dimension to the trees or shrubs in the foreground and then those pieces of bare ground. Then I used some permanent green middle with the brown to make the trees and shrubs on the hills in the back. I realized I've been calling them mountains, they're more like hills. But my camera did die when I started, so you just missed the first little bit of that. After that, I started adding the taller tree in the photo in and some shrubs to the background. I'd like to get better at painting branches on trees. I probably will do some painting studies or something to help me with that. I decided to try and get some more texture in the shrub areas using a fan brush. Fan brushes are often used for painting foliage, but my brush was definitely too big for this painting. But it's what I had, so I had to work with that. You can't really see the difference in the video, but it did add some texture, so I was content with that. Afterwards, I added some shadows in and then added some of the red shrubs that are so obvious in the wintertime here in Montana. I also added some more of those trees in the background, but I just added the thicker branches at this point. I can't remember my logic behind that, but the branches are added in later. Next was the part that I was the most excited about from the beginning, which is the fence. I don't know why these rustic fences make my knees weak when I see them, but I've always loved them. I grew up near some rural farm areas and definitely romanticized these landscapes with fields surrounded by rustic fences. I used to go on drives on back roads just to lift my mood with the view, and I usually found some stunning views or unexpected surprises, so it just brings back a lot of really nice memories. Moving on to the shelter, I went in and added the poles here, but I didn't bother going in with too much detail. I did change the color of the snow on the shelter to be a little bit lighter afterwards as well. I wanted to add some more of those low-lying plants in the background, so I went in and did that and added some of the trees behind the shelter as well. Then I went in and added those missing branches on the trees. Just as a reminder, I don't know what I'm doing. Anyways, here I added the snow on the fence. I also added some of the highlights in the shadows that were around the fence, making those little snow mounds under the fence where the snow had built up. Now I'm just getting into adding more details to the painting, adding some foliage details and adding more trees. These trees that I painted in the background actually have a lighter bark. I wasn't exactly sure how to go in and replicate that, but instead what I did was added some lighter brown, which didn't look quite right, and then I realized, oh yeah, these trees have snow on them and these shrubs have snow on them, so I go in and add some snow onto the branches of the shrubs in the foreground and then those trees in the background as well. It's not perfect, but it gets the point across. And that's the painting done. Some final thoughts on this painting are that I know I could have spent a lot more time on it and gone in and been more detailed. Maybe with the right knowledge and skills I would have, but I did the best I could with what I know right now. I feel like I'm at that point where I'm knowledgeable enough to know what I'm not doing well, but not knowledgeable enough to know how to fix the problems that I'm seeing on the paper. I just hope that this will come with practice and more research. I also learned that if I'm going to try funky colors, I need to have a better understanding of color theory. There are people who make incredible paintings with colors that don't match what we see in real life, but they have a good understanding of color theory to be able to do that. I also need to learn to be more loose with my details. Whether that's the way I hold my brush or the way I approach details, I just need to learn to be a little more loosey-goosey. I'd like to practice working more from background to foreground. I think that'll help me avoid covering up pieces of my painting several times to try and fix it. I also want to start thinking about the color palette of the entire painting before I get started. I think that'll help with the overall look of the painting in the end. Anyways, I hope that you enjoyed painting this winter landscape with me. Let me know if you also made a painting and how it went in the comments. If you take photos, tag me on Instagram at GabbyGetsCreative. I would love to see what you've created. If you liked this video, feel free to click the thumbs up below. It helps me reach more people and grow our community. If you'd like to keep up with me and my creative journey, feel free to subscribe to my channel. I'd love to have you. I put up videos every other week. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.